Thank you all. You know, I didn't actually tell you this. We had a chance to speak. Christian and I were speaking for the last 2 hours, so I hope we haven't run out of material. I don't think we have. And apparently we're going to start a podcast together. But I didn't tell you this. I bumped into someone yesterday on the streets of Athens who worked for you. And so I have to hear about this in person. Apparently you do a phenomenal Robin Williams impression from Good Morning Vietnam. Tell us the backstory here, and then tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, it's at Netlify, it's a distributed company, right? And so you want to make sure that you try to have a little bit of a shared culture. So we did these Monday morning kickoffs. And I would, if anyone know Robin Williams from Good Morning Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Like, so he does this, Good Morning Vietnam. And so I had a Good Morning Netlify. So yeah, that was the...
I don't know how many people will get that reference.
With a very booming voice, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you're Danish?
I am, yeah.
Born in Denmark. As they said, we're going to use this opportunity to talk about the differences between Europe and the U.S. and what lessons can be learned and what can be applied in Europe, et cetera, and the sources of the malaise to the extent that we want to call that. But I'd love to learn a little bit about you in the short time that we have here. Just tell me very briefly, your life story, and then use that as a kickoff to Netlify.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm originally from Copenhagen, Denmark, and 11 years ago I moved to Silicon Valley. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I was in the film and the digital agency space in Denmark, and I had sold my agency. I was chief digital officer at a company, and my buddy from high school was in Silicon Valley, and noticing there was these new trends within web development that he wanted to embody and sort of see if we could extend to a brand new architecture for the web. Back then, the web was kind of in trouble. It wasn't fast enough and performant enough, and that had to do with the fundamental architecture. And so we envisioned sort of a different way of doing that, where we would not have everyone visit a web server that would build for every visitor, but rather distribute that and start using the browsers of the individual users to distribute the runtime. And we needed a whole ecosystem for that, right? So that had to be in the Silicon Valley, right? Because if 10 years ago I would in Denmark try to raise money for a type of platform that didn't exist, that would cater a category that didn't exist either, they would just laugh. Actually, I tried and they laughed. And so we went there.
Did you attempt first to raise capital here?
Yeah, I just had a few conversations, right? They were like, yeah, no, right? And so we did build this developer platform that was sort of catering a new architecture for the web. And so because of that, every single service like e-commerce or content management or something had to be reinvented. Now, we were building the developer workflow platform where you would take all your different tools and your e-commerce and so on and make it into a website and distribute that and run it. But we needed everyone else to come in and build. So it was very sort of building first the Jamstack, which was something we coined, which was the name of the category, and really spreading that out and talking about the benefits when it comes to speed and scale and security, and having other builders, other founders come in and build in this space. And then, of course, also pushing forward the brand of our own platform. But yeah, we did that, had some success with it. We raised, I think, over time, $250 million. Today, we have about just over 50,000 new signups every day. And our primary users are agents. So anyone building agents, Netlify is a pretty default place to deploy it to. So we also saw that developers become agents, right? So we, instead of, I think when we started, we probably had a target audience of about 20 million. That maybe became 70 million over time. And then it felt like overnight it became 3 billion, right? Because anyone can prompt the site today, right? So it's a brand new digital economy. But yeah, that was the story of Netlify. But that also meant that I was interacting with all these different startups and the larger ecosystem. And I ended up on a handful of advisory boards, executive boards, and did a ton of angel investments and sort of continued that afterwards. I stepped out of Netlify from daily operations about 2 years ago. I still sit on the board. And now I co-founded some new companies because it was hard to
To sit
not
still?
do that. Yeah,
You find it very difficult.
a little bit. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's an opportunity there to diagnose cultural differences between the two continents. I mean, obviously, there's a common entrepreneurial culture. But so just to tie this off, you moved to Silicon Valley in 2015,
Yep.
and 2 years ago, you moved back
I
to
did
Denmark?
not. No, I still live in San
You still live,
I just stepped out of the operations
So
in Netlify.
I'm curious, what are the changes you've seen in the last 10 years or 12 years since you guys started Netlify and since you moved to Silicon Valley? Here in Europe specifically.
In
Have
Europe
you-
specifically, I think like when we left, like term sheets from European VCs were more sort of like phone books, right? And they were sort of coercing you to consolidate very quickly. They were not very founder friendly, and it felt like they were trying to mitigate risk early on, where the American more sort of spray and pray mentality is just like, here's some money, go either win or fail quickly, and so it was much more of an uphill battle. I felt like, right? They wanted 4 board seats, and I don't know, you give your money in tranches and so on. And I think that has developed, right? I think like getting seed capital, maybe not at the same valuations as a place like Silicon Valley, right? But it's much more straightforward now. I think there's still a big issue around scale capital here, but I think that has changed, right? And then I think in recent years, I think Europe has traditionally been dependent on incremental growth from existing industries rather than disruptive change from new industries. I think that's really at the crux of it. You look 20 years ago, a handful of the largest companies in the world were European. The biggest European company today has a market cap that is 1/14 of the largest American one. You look at public cloud offerings, the market cap combined in the US is what, 5,000 times bigger than the combined market cap of the European cloud providers? I mean, to say that we dropped the ball would be putting it too politely. And so I think there's a huge need to if we want to be competitive, right, to get after it. And I think that Europe has now realized in the last few years, first when it came to energy, and then military, and now software, that what was dependencies are actually vulnerabilities, right? And that we need to do something about it. And I also think that there's an environment that, let's say there was a European AWS that was up and running right now, I think that you would see a lot of government contracts around Europe that would stipulate this has to be in a European cloud, to be honest. I think that the reason there isn't is because the offerings aren't solid enough as of yet, but that will change. It'll take time, it'll take investment, but yeah, hopefully we'll also have the scale capital to build up a much larger ecosystem there, right? But
So one of the things that we were discussing earlier is, what the sort of the biggest bottlenecks or opportunity sets are. We talked about cultural differences. Regulations come up quite often. We didn't talk about that much. Language, market size, capital markets. What would you say is there one that you confidently think is the single biggest challenge and opportunity?
yeah, I mean, so in the last few years, I've also started leaning into some nonprofit work. So I sit on the advisory boards of a few European universities and spending more time talking about what we're talking about here. And one thing I notice is that when I travel around is that the European talent is absolutely there. Like, there's really, really good talent in Europe. And there is a ton of capital. It's, from a startup point of view, a little hidden, right? It sits in pension funds, and the European budget is about 3% of the federal budget in the US, right? But the European Union's budget, right? That's, I think, why regulation takes up so much space, because it's like, that's the hammer they have, right? But the money is just there, it's just nationalized instead. And so I think there is an issue of mindset more than anything else, right? Like the talent is here, the money is here, but it has to be utilized somewhat differently, right? I sit with a lot of universities where entrepreneurship is not on the map at all, right? And where success, if you ask students, is to work at a BMW or Novo Nordic or whatever it is the national sort of mastodon is, right? And I think if you go to Germany, the average age of the largest companies in Germany is 106 years. In Denmark, it's 103 years. In the US, it's 30 years. And every single one of them took on venture capital, right? So it looks very different. And I think, for me, you can talk about the issues of regulation, and well, that the pension funds are starting to put in money as LPs, but they do it in the proven stories in the US, so those are the VCs that are actually getting the capital rather than the European ones and so on. But I think all of this is very much the expression of the mentality, right? Like this notion of we have a different, longer history, and we have been more, again, dependent on incremental growth from existing industries. There's a bit of a mind shift, right? And that's just expressed in so many different ways. In media that aren't sufficiently, in my opinion, celebrating the successes of Europe, but they love when someone fails, right? Oh, someone put money in Noble, right? The battery thing up in Scandinavia, right? And then that didn't work, and then they'll talk about, oh, how big of a mistake it was, and the pension funds have to almost come out and do public apologies and so on, right? Whereas the success stories doesn't get us a lot of coverage. I think it's in universities where they're celebrating like the base academic research. And I'm not saying that all research should be sponsored and commercialized, right? We should have independent-based research, but we should not sort of, stigmatize commercial research. I think that the commercialization research just means that it has a real-life application. You can't get a drug out there unless it's commercialized, right? So you can say to someone, oh yeah, I kept my research pure, so just know that I could have treated your cancer. It's in theory, because I couldn't commercialize the research, but, isn't that great? I mean, like, I'm a little provocative, but I had these discussions that, were very real with some of these universities, right? Where it's a mind shift of that has so many embeddings throughout society. But these are some of the things that I think would be real. And then there's other things, right, which are much more practical. For example, we have public markets. There's one for each European country. It's very hard to compete with 27. We should sort of divide the pie by 27 rather than one in the US, for example, or two, or three. And so I would love to see more sort of unionized approach to centralized approach to capital markets in Europe, and it is a challenge that we have all these local markets, and of course we all speak different languages, and we shouldn't just be a united Europe. It's not about emulating the US, but it is about trying to say, how can we utilize the cash we have and the status of Europe being a place where the world actually would like to be, right, and come to import the big talent. I think that's the cornerstone of the US growth and success has really been the ability to attract the best talent in the world, right? The Einsteins of the world went to the US, right? And I think that Europe has a strong story, and it's only becoming stronger as the rest of the world, without getting into too much geopolitical stuff, is, for a lot of people is less attractive, right? I speak to a lot of founders in the US that talk dreamily of Europe, right? And I think if they were incentivized properly, they would love to come here as well, right? It's not just a question of how we provide better terms for European founders. I think we can really be the hub that everyone would journey to. But that requires solving some of these challenges. And I think to solve some of these challenges, at least, requires a bit of a shift in mentality.
I feel like that also speaks to a paradox. You said a lot of American founders speak dreamily. I don't know if that's a word, but I just came up with it. Of Europe, and Europe is a really great place to live. And in fact, oftentimes when you've made it, you want to move to London or you want to move to Europe. And so many of the things that make Europe such a great place to live also work against it when it comes to making it a place for capital and innovation. Do you see that as a challenge? And what are some sort of ways in which you think that can be navigated?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a good point, right? So, like, I often, I speak to an Uber driver every time I say, like, I can't help myself. I always talk to whoever's nearby. And in the US, right, like, I've never met someone that I just drive Uber. Oh, cab, that's it. It's cool. Never. Like, no, they always have an idea for an app. Even though it's pretty obvious that that app will never be, right? There's this notion of, like, constant drive, right? There's also, which I don't think is a great thing from a society point of view, but there's not a lot of safety net. If you don't keep moving, you drown, right? And so there's also a need for a different drive in a place like that. But there's this, I'm not sure how much is discussed here, right? But every year there comes out this happiness index, right? And I'm from Copenhagen. Like, it's always like a Scandinavian country. By the way, there's also the most suicides up there, so take it for what you will, right? But I think for me it's a very interesting exemplification of this difference in mentality, because here in Denmark, for example, there's like a status in saying I'm content, and that's really what you're answering when you're saying when you're happy, like, oh, I'm in a good place. Like, there's status in being good at where you are. You ask an American, oh, so you're settled, you're good, you don't need anything, so your kids don't need to go to a better college? No? By the way, in the time, looking back, when minimum wage have gone up 40% in the US, college has gone up 600%. This notion of social mobility, if you can be anything you will, which is what we're a little bit discussing in the US, actually the premise of that is much more present in Europe, where there's much easier access to the education and so on that will actually enable you to do anything you want. But I think in the US, you're asking someone like that, it's almost offensive, right? Like, oh, so you don't need to do better for your kids or for your spouse, but you're good. You don't need to go anywhere else in life. You're done already? Like, it's almost like people will take a little offense, you know? Like, no, hell no. No, of course, no, I'm still hustling. No, I have all these plans. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, right? I'm not content where I'm at. And you can say, well, which is from a philosophical point of view, the healthier answer, right? But from a growth mindset of pushing the forward, right, and driving change and impact, I think that explains a little bit the shift in mentality. There's a different drive over there, and it's something you feel. And I'm also, to a large extent, talking about Silicon Valley and the mentality there, because of course the US has a lot of things, right? And there's a bunch of places there where you don't feel that at all, right? But yeah.
It's also interesting because America is changing now too. We were talking about this as well, which is like, and this is true in general, you know, our greatest strengths are our greatest weaknesses.
Yep.
And so the forces that have driven the American economy forward and allowed for rapid innovation, whether we're talking about technology or business models, have also led to instability in the foundation, and that creates whipsaw effects. And we could be in another one now today, which I do think we are in the early stages of a long cycle of regulation, of clampdown, potentially of risk aversion in the US. Are there any interesting lessons that can be drawn from the Chinese example? So, like, why am I bringing this up, the parallel? America's the new world. It's had an expanding frontier. It's sort of ingrained in the culture, risk-taking. Also, so many Protestants moved to the United States. It was a more decentralized culture from every sense of the word. Europe is more old world. There's a lot of beautiful cathedrals and ancient sites to preserve. And so there's a desire to hold on to that past. That past also, in some sense, becomes a kind of obstacle that is difficult to overcome in the way that you have some, really successful father figure. You look at him and you say, how can I ever, overcome this individual? But then you look at China. China is as old or older, a sort of unified civilization, certainly, as Europe. And they have innovated, let's put a word, they're innovating now, but they've scaled and grown their economy in ways that obviously are unprecedented. Are there any lessons that can be applied from the Chinese model here in Europe? And if not, what are the differences that make that difficult?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a tough one, right? I think China has three things, right? One is there's a gigantic market, obviously, right? It's huge. And that is a challenge. Like, even the larger European markets like Germany and so on, stand alone, it's not big enough, right? Like, European market is big enough, but it has the challenges of fragmentation and so on. But I think in China, that's one. The other is, and this is going to sound awful, right? But it's dictatorship, right? Like, it's easy to get alignment if you say, you all walk left or we kill you, right? I mean, like, I'm being a little gruff here, right? But the reality just is that you can sort of make these policy decisions and then have them implemented across the board because there's a one-party rule and they don't have to worry about elections and this is not a suggestion for anyone, right? But I'm just saying, like, it is when they do these huge shifts, right? And when they choose to subsidize entire industry and so on, they do so, very rapidly and without, like, having to drive a ton of consensus and so on, right? And so obviously that can help across certain sort of adoption of policies and driving forward. And I think that the third one is there's a huge hustle mentality, right? Like you go to suburbs of the largest Chinese cities, the rush hour is 10:30 p.m. because that's when the parents pick up their kids from school. I mean, you know, is that admirable or is it like desirable? It's a different question. But there's an extreme hustle, right? Like there's really put in a lot of hours. I now have an AI research lab, and so we're doing super forecasting. And the academic papers in the space, I think it's about 95% of the authors are Chinese. And they, right now, are publishing these papers from universities all over the world, but the raw talent is really coming there, and so that's definitely part of it, right? I'm seeing a huge change. I'm also seeing that they came from doing production, from now also being understanding doing innovation and distribution, right? I think they've been helped along by other superpowers that might not be winning popularity contests right now, and maybe China has become more the adult in the room, for some, right? And that's helped them forward in their international positioning. But yeah, Chinese example is something we should definitely not ignore. They're obviously already a gigantic factor. You know, I was speaking to a room full of politicians the other day, and they were saying the reality is that the sanctions of Russia hasn't actually had that huge effect, right? Like, it hasn't really sort of dissolved economies or driven a really big impact, right? Like, these sanctions are not that hard to uphold. However, if we were doing the same in China, everything would grind to a halt. It would be simply virtually impossible, right? And so the dependencies on China as a producer and an innovator is really big already.
Is it possible to squeeze one question in? One more question? No? Okay. It's all right. The rules. We have to stick by the rules. All right. Well, Christian, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.